My name is Stephanie Torres. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Academic Success. Work with undergraduate advising, tutoring, and various academic supports that are connected to the classroom.
And hi, I'm Becky Smith. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the director of the Disability Resource Center here at UNC. And so we provide all of the disability resources, academic accommodations, housing, dining accommodations for students with disabilities on campus. Nice to meet you all.
Well, thank you both for introducing yourselves. Stephanie, I will get my screen shared and then you can go ahead and get started.
Wonderful. Okay, so as I said, I'm the AVP or Assistant Vice President for Student Academic Success. And what I hope to do today is just chat with you a little bit about the transition from high school K-12 system to the university setting. A few things to keep in mind as I'm sharing some information. There are some generalizations. Some of the things that I might share may fit well with the student that you're supporting. And then there's other aspects that just don't seem to fit, and that's okay. There's a variety of different students that come in, and each student is unique and has their own unique experiences, and we'll talk about that. Also, for those of you who have students who've taken college credits or perhaps even are entering UNC from high school with courses that equate to possibly an AA or an AS degree, I think there's still things here that are worth consideration in that transition. And we'll talk about that. Some of the difference will be that the courses that they took may have been on site at their school, still had the same support structures that are in the high school setting in terms of monitoring by teacher and you as support people, and a little bit about how that might look when you get into this setting is something to think about. And so we'll also address that. As Cedric said, questions are welcome. I'm going to have Cedric monitor the chat, and if something is pressing that we need to answer while I'm presenting, then we'll go ahead and pause and address that, and then otherwise we'll try to address those questions and comments towards the end. And so we'll get started from here. You can advance it. The first thing I want to say to you is that I'm a parent also. I'm the parent of I'm a parent and support person of a college student. Actually, this last year was the first year for my oldest as he finished his first year actually at UNC. And I'm going to talk about him a bit as we go through this presentation, and with his permission. I've been using him as my case example the last few years. And similar to this photo, I've thought a lot about, this was the first day of kindergarten. And this young man has always been someone who said, I'll do it myself, and very independent. And I was thinking about how big that transition was to go from being a preschooler to a kindergartner. And this is another one of those transitions. There's many transitions when they go from elementary to middle or junior high and then to high school, and now we're at this next stage, and they all have their unique kind of feelings and the excitement that is around that. You can go to the next slide. So two things that I hope that we can kind of address here today, more in not the hard answers to it, but at least open up the question a little bit more for people as they consider their own students, is how students' prior experiences affect the way they learn. So all the experiences that they've had up till now, and how those experiences impact, mold, shape some of the habits that they have in thinking and acting in the way that they approach this next stage of learning. And so we'll talk about that. You can go to the next slide. So we're at a university, and we like our theories. And I think a lot about my dad, who would have said, I don't care what Dr. So-and-so said this, it's just basic common sense, and perhaps it is, and it's also a theoretical construct. And so we'll, as my son would say, flex a little bit and show you some of how that fits within those theoretical constructs, but also talk about it in plain language. So we'll walk through that. But basically, students, as we've been talking about since I started, enter the university not as a blank slate, but they have their own experiences from their various educational backgrounds, from their personal experiences. And so when we think about student success, which is something that our university cares quite a bit about, we have to understand that students are not coming in as a blank slate. And so when they come into our university, which is considered the organizational context, we're thinking about what are the factors that help shape and promote persistence, retention, graduation, all those things that we care about. And so when I talk about retention, I'm speaking about successfully being retained from first semester through their second semester. That's the persistence. When you persist, it's moving from one level to another, whether it's term to term, year to year. And it's not just good academics, it's what's happening in the classroom, and those experiences. It's the experiences outside of the classroom, and how also they connect to the different opportunities for engagement, extracurricular activities. I oversee academic support, so some of those support services, but also as important, if not more important, I think, for students as we're coming into this post-pandemic environment, is helping students re-engage and get involved and connected with other peers and with faculty and staff outside of the classroom. I think it's going to be critical to them feeling like they belong here. And so all these things kind of mix together as ingredients that really promote persistence and ultimately graduation. We want to celebrate similarly. If you had an opportunity to have graduation cake this year, in the last few months, we want to get to that next stage again in the next 4 or so years. You can go to the next slide. So you can go to the next slide. So some of what it creates success in high school translated into college, I think, just keeps you above water. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Next slide. And I have a mock-up of I'm ahead of myself. Some of the things that I've observed in high school, again, these are generalizations, but with my own children, I still have I have a rising senior, and then I have a rising senior in high school and rising sophomore in college. I've noticed in high school that there's a lot more opportunities for testing what you know through small quizzes, daily homework. The learning, when I talk about the learning being passive, what I'm discussing there is that it's clear for many of the things that students are learning in high school in their K-12 experience, there is a more direct line between what is being talked about in the classroom with the homework, that they can expect that is what then they should know and be able to repeat back in whatever forms through tests, writing assignments, class discussion as what they know. And so when I talk about pro forma homework with a high value, what I'm saying there is that your points that are assigned to homework for some courses that you take in K-12 can move your grade up or down, whether or not you complete them with ease. I've seen my own kids' grades move quite a bit in a week, depending on if they've turned in assignments, completed assignments, those sort of things. And so homework is kind of a standard part of how the students study, in fact. And so I've had a lot of insight over the last few years in those conversations with my own students. And this ethos of advancement is like the spirit or culture of something, and the way that one advances as a student in terms of how we think about K through 12 success is based on some things like standardized testing. And we also consider that an indicator of the teacher's success, how students are doing on those standardized tests. And so there are moments where we may be teaching to the test to help ensure that students are successful in their test taking. And it's not just about the test, but I think it is an indicator of what students have learned. And so it's kind of driven some of the ways in which we deliver K through 12 learning. I've also noticed that there are opportunities in some of the courses that my kids have taken, at least for extra credit, and that offsets, a bad week or a bad term or a quarter or what have you, if they have a chance to do some extra credit. And that seems to be kind of a standard opportunity for certain courses or certain teachers in K-12. You can go to the next. One of the things that has happened through No Child Left Behind, which is, more than a decades old now, and some of the other efforts to involve our support people in the K through 12 students' experience, is to create pathways for family and support people to monitor their K through 12 students' academics. And so here in the district that we're in, we have an app that in real time, it's considered or supposed to be in real time, students can see their grades. And so teachers are supposed to update their grade book, their electronic grade book daily. And then teachers, counselors, support people can all monitor, and the student, more importantly, from my perspective, should be monitoring where they're at with their academics. And full disclosure, I am one of those parent/support people who still doesn't know the password to get on this system. And I think can't even remember what the name of it was. I think it's Infinity or something. And there's been wonderful counselors who have offered to walk me through setting up the password and looking at it. But I've adopted an extreme philosophy around this after working with university college students for the last 25 years, that it's more important that my student utilize that platform than it is me, because it's their program and their degree. I already have a high school degree. And so I want them to take ownership of it. And so what I've seen happen with this is a little bit of yo-yo grade occurrence. And I understand the psychology behind this. It's a behavior modifier. So a student sees their grade is slipping, and it cues them in that they need to pick up the pace, they need to turn in missing assignments, they need to refocus, and then you see kind of the grades move up and assignments start to be turned in, and particularly if you have support people, counselors, teachers, parents, whomever, following up with the student about their grades. And that was happening in my house. And my kids, their parents are in separate households. And so what was happening for us is screenshots of this grade book were being sent in group chats to myself and whichever kid needed the behavioral nudge. In this case, my oldest. And it felt a little bit like a roller coaster. You can go to the next screen. That young person in the back, you can see loves roller coasters. Up. Me, not so much. I didn't see very much of Disneyland. I kept my eyes closed, but I committed to riding all the rides. And so what was happening is that we had an up and down situation. My kids are fortunate, maybe not from their perspective, but they're fortunate to have their dad teach at the high school that they attended. And so there was a lot of hands-on monitoring of their success. But it's so important to me that as they transition, that they understand that I won't have access to their grades at the university level. I don't have that. That's theirs, and they would have to share that information with me. And so I wanted them to start to experience what that's like to be the primary person responsible for monitoring that. And so we made an agreement that I don't want any more screenshots of low grades because one, I may be a little bit competitive, and it feels a little bit like I'm asleep on the job when the co-parent sends me screenshots that my son's grades were dropping. But also I just wanted my son to understand that that's his and he needs to take ownership of it. But this is very it's not unusual that we see those up and down grades as students kind of get a feel for how a teacher is testing, what their expectations are on papers and assignments. I think that's very common, but what's important is I don't want to ride the roller coaster with them. I think that it's really important that they kind of figure out and fine tune what is the level of workload that they need to maintain in order to maintain good grades. You can go to the next screen. So I've mocked up a senior year schedule. So in addition to kind of the monitoring support that we have in high school or in K-12 through counselors, teachers, and support people, I think that that's a great advantage, and it's improved completion rates in the K through 12 system. There's a lot of success there. Another thing that I've noticed about the high school experience is as you get into the senior year, for some students, their schedule can lighten up. They may not have as many assignments. I think there's a lot of changes or differences that might have occurred in this last year through a pandemic. I noticed locally that there were some students who opted to finish early. So they finished all of their required coursework in the first 2 quarters instead of if we had had more in person, they may have with pre-pandemic kind of experiences, they may have stayed throughout the entire academic year. So there's a lot of our variety, I think, that occurred. For this mocked up high school schedule, my point really here is that courses seem to be clustered together. They're not spread out through the day, that you kind of have a set schedule that's sometime in the morning, whether it's 8, 9 in the morning, and then end somewhere between 2 and 3 at the end of the day. And so once students have gone to school for whatever that time block looked like, and for the senior year, again, I've noticed for some it's even shorter. I know that our students are very involved, particularly at UNC. I can tell you our data shows that we, compared to the national average of other college students across the United States, we have a higher, what's called higher work burden, which means that we have a higher percentage of our students working a high percentage of hours in a week. And so they're working anywhere from 20 to 30 hours a week for some of those students. And so I know that our students come to UNC busy, which means they were busy in their K through 12 experience. And so, you know, that after school time is dedicated to all those commitments and also to connecting with friends. And then I have maybe homework there for a reason. Here's what a typical conversation in our house looks like. Don't you have any homework to do? And then one of them will answer, I don't have, or would answer, don't you have any studying? Shouldn't you study for this or that? And then someone would answer, I don't have any homework. So I'm asking about studying and they're answering about homework. And I also observe, for at least for my household, that they can stay up all night. So hard to get up in the morning, but they can stay up all night. So, you know, they maximize that 4 to midnight time frame with things, but not so much in studying, depending on the course and the student, of course, because I know that there's students in AP and IB, and I had some of that in my household as well. You can go to the next slide. So now I want to take all of that I've observed, what I kind of see in terms of structure and cadence of assignments and homework and those sort of things, what a senior schedule kind of looks like, which sometimes is lighter, which the days, whether it's a senior year or any year in a high school experience, is a little bit more blocked in terms of its scheduling. And now we're going to talk about some of my observations at the university level. And as I talk about this, I just want you to know that when I think about students, I think about the oak tree that's in the acorn. And so that's what this imagery is. Also, I may bring it up again later, but if you haven't been to campus yet, I will tell you that we have a strange love for squirrels here, and there's plenty of them. They scare me personally, but so there's a number of different, it's our unofficial mascot. I actually think squirrels are. It's not the bear, so this can have a few meanings to it. Cedric, you can go to the next slide. Here's a mock-up of a first-year college schedule. It's just a mock-up. And what are some of the things, just as you're thinking about, that you might notice about this schedule, particularly as you compare to what you know about your students' high school schedule, whether it's their entire high school schedule or even that senior year? Some things that I want to point out to you is that you still have the students set up some block kind of scheduling in terms of they're taking classes. This is a morning student who's taking classes right away at 8 and is done with their day by 2. So they've essentially kind of set up something similar to what they experienced in their K-12. You might see a schedule that has an 8 o'clock, then nothing, then 10, then a 1, then a 4 o'clock, and Cedric's nodding his head. So it's really spread out, and there's these random, it kind of feels in some ways, hour or 2-hour blocks between the courses. It really depends on what the student's pursuing, the availability of courses, the way those puzzle pieces fit together. Because unlike high school, where you have counselors working with the senior team of faculty or teachers at a high school talking about here's how we're going to build the schedule for our seniors, this is more of a mix. You have a lot of different separate departments coming together who are offering different courses, and so there's a variety of times in it, and there's a lot more choice for how you put those together. The other thing that I would notice is that there isn't any classes on Thursday. So on some college campuses, for sure for this one, Wednesday nights have always been kind of a popular night to socialize with friends, and this student has built their schedule so that they can possibly sleep all day Thursday. My hope is that they've built it so that they can really spend a full day studying and doing the work that's necessary to stay on task. But there's this open block. I've blocked out the maybe study time because I think here's what happens for first year students sometimes in that very first semester is some of the deception around what's being done in class. There may not be homework assignments, and we'll talk about that in a moment. If there's not assigned homework, they're thinking, I only have 5 classes, 4 classes. That's usually something that I might hear a student say, and it's really easy right now. There isn't any homework. I've got a lot of open time. It's deceptive, I think. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Go to the next slide. So at first, I think it feels a little subtle for students, these differences, because it seemingly looks like a lot less demand on their time than what they experienced in their K through 12, where they're packing in every hour with something, whether it was outside of the classroom activities, homework, or the class itself. So what you'll find, what students will find when they're in classes is that one of the primary ways that we assess learning will be on exams, and they won't be that often for depending on the course, and it will be large amounts of material. It won't be clear potentially for our students exactly what they're going to be tested on. Where I feel like in the K-12 experience, and particularly in their high school experience, there's a clearer line on, I've heard students say, do we have to know this for the test? And a question like that at a college level will not get a warm response potentially from some faculty, but all of it is worth knowing, and it may or may not be directly asked on the test, but it all contributes to how they will respond in exams. So there are some classes that a student may have a midterm and a final, and those will be the largest parts of their grade. And so for a student like mine, my older student who needs some time to kind of calibrate their grades because they're not sure how the teacher is going to be testing, what their expectations are, they're a student who in their K-12 experience found success with maybe one low grade, and then they improved because they got a better sense of what to expect in the test, and they built upon that. But if you only have 2 major testing opportunities, the stakes are much higher. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough. Quizzes, homework, and class participation, while it may exist in some of the classes that your students take, It won't be as weighted heavily as exams and papers and projects might be. And it'll be unusual to find courses that offer extra credit. So now the stakes feel so much higher in terms of maximizing your success on those exams, making sure that your papers are prepared in the way that they should, that you're participating in class. Those things become even more important. As I mentioned before, the learning tests are often broadly defined, so it's not really clear, I think, at first for students if they're even doing well in the class. One of the things I like about the high school experience in frequent testing and homework and things is that I would consider that low stakes assessment. It does help the student figure out, with what we've been talking about in class, with what I'm reading, and then I have this homework or quiz, how much of that am I understanding? It also gives an indication to the teacher or faculty member how much of what I'm presenting and providing for students are they understanding. When the learning tests are a little bit more broadly defined, when there's not as much homework, it feels a little bit like you just don't know if you're doing well. For some students, I think it creates anxiety. They're just certain they're failing when they may not be. For other students, they think they're doing fine because they haven't received any information counter to that. There are in classes reading assignments that the faculty may never talk about. So they have all this assigned reading. It might be textbooks, journal articles that they have to pick up out of the electronic repository or through the library. And then there's class discussions, and then there's a lecture. And what you might find is that the faculty never talks about the things that required the students to read. And I think for a student who came through a school experience where what mattered had a high grade or consequence assigned to it, so it put a value on it, that's the thing that I put my attention to. It's misleading because they think maybe I don't need the book for this class, or I'm not reading anymore because we never talk about those things in class. The teacher never asks about it, or the faculty never asks about it. But then they get to that midterm, and really what's being asked of them is to make sense of the combination of everything that they read on their own time, the lectures, the class participation, and it all kind of fits together and shows up in the way the questions are asked in their midterm or their final exams. And so it can be unexpected, and it will feel like we never talked about those things in class, but in fact, they were probably in the readings. And I think that the amount of reading material can feel overwhelming. And so it's so important that students spread that out. This is where all that study conversation that I have when I'm asking my own learners at home, do you have anything to study? And they're answering, I don't have homework. What happens in the college experience is different from the K through 12, where the control of the learning experience was in the classroom. Now we're saying that's on your own time. We're going to provide you all of the content. We're going to give you directions. The faculty is going to bring their own research and expertise to the conversation. But now then you take that information, and outside of class, your homework is to study and to make meaning and to ask yourself questions and to dig deeper into that material. And I think it's not explicit, it's subtle for students that this shift is happening. Not all the faculty are going to make that distinction. Here's how we're different from high school, but the expectation is you always have something to study outside of class. And there's some rules of thumb you might have heard about that say for every hour you're in class, you should spend about 1.5 to 2 or 3 hours outside of class on that material. I've seen a few different kind of measurements on that. And it takes a while sometimes for students to kind of figure out what they should be focusing on. I also want to say something about attendance. Attendance is crucial, but no one is necessarily taking attendance. Again, this is where students in their past experiences, attendance was important and they knew it because there were automated phone calls. that you received when your student missed class or missed a block or had an unexcused absence. There were points lost in the class when they missed classes, but now that missed attendance to a class has a few other kind of negative implications, but may not be direct. You're missing important information that's only presented by the faculty in class. You may be dependent on someone else's notes who need to remember things that you may not, or heard things differently than you would as a student. And so it's better to be there than to have someone else give you the information that you missed. And you're also communicating the value you have of that class and that faculty by not attending. And life happens. We all have complicated lives. And there's going to be moments where a student has to miss a class. And if they haven't built that social capital with their faculty and they are a frequent absentee student, then that's going to contribute to kind of how the faculty views them when something really important comes up and they do need to miss. And so it's just so important for students. I've seen students fail courses from missing classes, and it's heartbreaking because you can't make up for that lost time. There's only 15 weeks for a standard class, and every class time matters. Next. So another theory, this one I think is talked about also in K-12. It's just Bloom's taxonomy of learning. You can advance the slide just one more time. Oops, I'm sorry, I thought I had, yes. One of the things that I notice is that K-12 kind of focuses in on the lower parts of the pyramid more often than not. Again, we do have IB, we have college credit that they're taking. I understand that there are very challenging classes that our students take in K-12, but generally speaking, the work and the assignments and the things that are done focus in on like building a general knowledge. Do the students understand it? Can they give us examples of how that would be applied? What happens at the college level is kind of that higher order level of thinking and learning, and this is where we're going to push students to not only be able to kind of articulate how those ideas and concepts can be applied, but to critique it and to interrogate it and analyze it, to bring different ideas together and summarize it and synthesize it, and to evaluate, its value, essentially, and what they think of it. What do you think of it? I don't think we ask students enough in the K-12 what they think of things. Instead, we are asking them, what do you think? And they say, what do you want me to think? Because I want to get a good grade on the test. And so this is going to be the shift, and it feels a little bit scary for some students, and it's liberating for others. You can go to the next slide. We asked our students in 2016 orientation what they thought that their first semester GPA might be. And so this is the distribution of that in terms of how students saw themselves in terms of how well they do after their first semester. And the average was, 3.28. So you know what the next slide is going to be. I think the next slide is what the reality was. And so a few things that I want to say about this. I am not telling you that your student is going to get a 2.56. It's just something we see in the average data, and there's averages and data, and there's statistics, and then there's the individual student. And certainly what I also want to tell you is that there's always variation. And so I've been pleased to see students who didn't do well in high school, and it possibly was because just the environment and structure didn't connect for them, and they flourished in high school. Generally speaking, what I see in terms of a high school cumulative GPA is a good indicator of what their first semester or first year GPA will be in college. Even though all of the differences in what I just talked about in terms of learning, it assumes that students are turning the dial up in terms of how they're approaching their learning. And I generally see a student who had a 3.56 in high school, they have somewhere between a 3.25 and a 3.5 in their first year of college. But again, it depends on how they're they're upping their game a little bit, but if they're not, you're going to see slight drops, as I demonstrate in this slide and what I've seen in the data, that doing everything that what made you successful in high school and applying that to college may create some frustration because they perhaps never had to struggle in a course. They didn't have to study. It was workable just to do the homework, and they excelled and legitimately excelled in high school. And now they are going to have to put more time into their studying, and they're going to have to learn different strategies. They may not have study strategies developed yet. And so it's a little bit of experimentation. You can go to the next slide. So we have another theory. I told you I love all these theories and notions. And there's this researcher who talks about when you're introduced to something new, what happens in terms of our performance. And it's an organizational theory. And my background is in organizational development and change. And so I have the imagery of a tandem bike. And if you just imagine, if you will, that you are on that bike with, you can be on that bike with your student, or and they're driving, they're in the front seat, or with your squeeze, that's what I call people's partners. And imagine that you're on that bike, and for generally speaking, for most of us, there's going to be a little bit of adjustment and frustration because of communicating. I thought we were leaning right. I was going to lean right and you were going to lean left to kind of balance that. And we might fall over because we're kind of calibrating to, perhaps you know how to ride a bike when you're on your own, but riding a tandem is a bike, but it's slightly different. For those of you who have squeezes where you're just really synced up and you're, you can read each other's mind, good for you. But for the rest of us, we're going to maybe have a mini argument while we're on our tandem bike as we figure out who's in charge and how we're going to balance this bike. And that is similar to, our students have been in school their entire lives. In fact, they've been in school for 12 plus years. It's now they're just going to school some more. It's familiar, but different. So this is a tandem bike. It's familiar to a quote unquote regular bike, but it's different. And so the idea around this organizational performance is that when you're on a regular bike, you know your level of how to ride it, you know school, you can do it at your current level. But then we introduce this new idea, this slightly different bike, and there's a drop in performance. Now, this theorist calls this the valley of death. It's fascinating. Who would name a theory and then throw in valley of death? It sounds so dark. But basically, when you are introduced to something new, your quality of performance drops down. So you'll have a dip. But once you've figured things out, actually what happens is there's an increase in performance and you're at a whole new level of skill set. And so I'm creating this imagery, and you can go to the next slide. It's a J curve of change. I call this, you can go to the next slide, Cedric. I call this the Valley of the Delta. I've changed the name of that person's theory, but the Delta is the struggle. I think it's the messy middle. I think that our students are going to go through some changes. Some of them will be academic. Some of them will be just social and living environments. Some of our students have never shared a room with anyone before, and they may perhaps be living in the residence halls and have to negotiate things they haven't. But this is familiar, but slightly different. And there might be a dip in their performance, in their satisfaction, in their experience. But once they figure out this, they're going to be at a whole new level with a whole new set of skill sets. So I think it's so important to kind of imagine that. And personally, I've learned so much more from the things that I've had to struggle from than the things that came easy. And so as you're watching your student go through this next year, and then if you think about the resiliency of what they've been through in the last year and a half, they've been in a Delta, and I think that they're going to excel, but there'll also be some exploration in terms of what they need in order to be successful. You can go to the next slide. So then there's the first exam, and I think I have a pop quiz for you. So I hope you've been paying attention. Good news is it's an open book. So And you're welcome to answer in the chat. You want to go to the next slide? It's an open book, so I'm going to read this to you, and then I have a pop quiz for you. It's 100 points, and we'll go through the exam questions. So last Cerny, Flingeldobe and Pribben were in the birdlink, treppering gloopy caples and gleaming burly greps. Suddenly a diddy strezzle boofed in Flingeldobe's tress. Pribben glaped and glaped. Oh, Flingeldobe, he chifed, that diddy strezzle is tuning in your grep. So 100 points. First question, when did this happen? And just sometimes people pop the answers in the chat. No pressure, I'll wait. So when did this happen? It's open book. So when did it happen? It happened last Cerny. Do you see that? Yes, I see. Jen, good job. 25 points. That was the first question, was worth 25 points. Second question. What boofed in Flingeldobe's tress? And the answer to that is a diddy strezzle. So suddenly a diddy strezzle boofed into Flingeldobe's tress. That was 25 points. Good job. Last question. It's worth half the grade. When did this happen and why? Now, as you're reading through this again, and it sounds like gobbledygook, I want to tell you a few things. This is, I think, a funny way to kind of express what it can sometimes feel like for a new student when they're reading a textbook with a whole bunch of terminology that's not familiar to them, when they're in a class and they're in the test and they're feeling like it's overwhelming and they're not sure. An open book test does not mean that all the answers are explicitly in there. They were used to being able to find direct answers. And my last question is an example of that pyramid we were talking about. There isn't a definite answer here. This is asking students to take what information they have and to now analyze it and make meaning of it and provide a supporting statement for why they believe what has happened next based on the information that they have. And I think that those feel like big risks for students because they want to do it right and get it right, and it's not clear here. But what we're testing is an ability for critical thinking, for summarizing, for taking what information that you have and combining it perhaps with other material and discussions. And it can feel overwhelming. You can go to the next slide. So now I've said all of these things. Again, it's not necessarily your student, but there might be a snippet here or there that connects for you. What should you keep in mind going forward? Go to the next slide. As I was talking about, the first year and some of the examples that I provided for you is really a year of learning how to learn in some ways. And it's surprising. I think that for students who didn't take a lot of college and high school, they're going to take classes they thought they didn't have to take ever again. It's called our general education or liberal arts core. And it's foundational important, I think, to students as they go into their major degree program and also into the world of work afterward. And so there's certainly classes there that are more exciting than what they might have had opportunity for, but it also still is science, mathematics, history, and those sort of things. And now they're going to need to figure out what it takes to be successful at that level. We have every class has what's called a syllabus, and it's a really good start for students to start there and read through the material to see what is expected in the class. When are the deadlines? Are there specific deadlines outlined? Is there a paper? One thing that I didn't talk about that I'll just make note here is that my observation in my kids' high school experience is that their papers had a scaffolded kind of learning structure where first they had to come up with a topic and I signed off on it. Then they did outlines and maybe shared it with classmates who gave them feedback about their outline and then turned that into their faculty. And then each of these stages are for a grade. And the next step is a rough draft, and then that's graded and feedback from classmates. And then finally your final paper. That's a scaffolded way to show students what it takes to build a well thought out and planned paper. Now they might just have an assignment that notes when the deadline is for the final paper, but there's may not be any other discussion about that paper until its due date. And it can surprise students if they're not reading their syllabus, paying attention to deadlines, and kind of backwards planning what they need to do this week for something that's due 5 weeks from now. And when students get early feedback, they may be in classes where they're getting comments and feedback on a few assignments or smaller writing assignments. They need to pay attention to that. And if something doesn't make sense or they have questions, they should utilize their faculty's office hours. It's so important. Those hours are not the faculty's hours, those are your hours as students. And so that's something that they'll hear from their advisors, who are also sometimes referred to as success coaches, but they'll hear that information from residence hall assistants, from other support staff, that it's so important to meet with your faculty. And this is where we've been talking about all of what this year will do is prepare them to take ownership of their learning. Next slide. For you as support people, I just want to encourage you to remember remember the delta, remember there is a dip sometimes as we're figuring out things, and then there's an increase in performance. There may be some bumps. I think the reason that we have so much of this new student orientation information and parent information and support people is because you are important partners in that work. And I think it's asking questions, reminding them that there are services. You don't have to memorize anything that I've shared here, but it's more about the ways that you can nudge them to utilize their resources and continue to be someone interested and supportive of what they're doing. There's midterms. I think that's a good time to check in with students and for sure expect a transformation. I've seen it also in my own students. When I look at my son's polished senior picture and the shaggy guy at the end of the first year of college, he's had quite a transformation, not only visually, but also in his experiences. You know, we had a lot of texting back and forth. He struggled in a class. His grade was very low. He missed some critical assignments to turn in, and he spent the rest of the semester working at that. He had to utilize the writing center quite a bit. It was essential. One time he messaged me and said, college is like a second job. I kind of modified it there, but you know, the university employee responded back, well, it's your first job, not your second job. That other job you have isn't your first job. But essentially what I'm saying is that I could see even in our chats that he was understanding what it means to be a college student in a new way and self-discovery. And he also took great pride in those successes because he really worked at them. And so I know you're gonna see some of those similar things for your own students. I believe the slides and the recording are going to be made available for you, and there's a lot of resources. Some of the things that are listed here are available in additional sessions that you can participate in. I think the advising session that my staff member Haley Blackburn provides is very comprehensive and useful for students and support people to pay attention to. We have tutorial services. We have a lot of different supports. We also have, you can go to the next slide. We have a University 101 course. That's in the world of this first year, we'll be learning how to learn. That's a course specifically based on the science of learning. And so I enrolled my own student in that course, and I think it was critical to the success that he experienced in this first year. Our research shows that students who take that course longer term, remember when we talked about that very first theory of persistence and graduation, the persistence and retention rates of students who take that University 101 course are higher than the students who do not. And it cuts across all kinds of demographics and characteristics for those students who started as high performers and those that maybe had some growth opportunities. There's a family calendar that is made available to all of us. Cedric, you want to remind me, we've made that available to everyone?
Yes, and it will be sent to you based on the information that your student gave during their admissions process.
Wonderful. And I have mine that I keep on my desk. I think it's, yep, this one was from the previous year that I have found very useful, and it includes in the calendar important deadlines and things. So it kind of helps me be that support and asking questions and reminding them of opportunities and deadlines, in addition to all of the support they have here on campus. There's some questions I think that you can ask in this next couple months. I was thinking about how important car rides are. So when I'm in the car, when I used to be in the car with my own children before they could drive, I don't like to drive with them the driver. I'm too nervous. But when they would ride with me, some of our most important conversations happened when we weren't looking at each other, but we were in the car together. And I think, you know, over the next couple of months before school starts, I think there are things that you can ask them that are open-ended that will just get that conversation going and help you in terms of getting insight into what they're unsure about, what they're excited about, and so on. Next slide. I think that this is it. Again, we're looking at the oak tree and the acorn, and I'm just really thankful and appreciative that you are sending your students here to UNC. As I said, I've been here 25 years. I have the joy and honor of talking to parent and support people at the front end of this process. And it's my honor to be able to read names at the end of the process at graduation. And there's nothing better than seeing the transformation that your students will go through. And what I'd want you to know is that we have a tremendous amount of support here. The critical piece is the student has to seek it out. We're not at the mind reading stage where we can just come to their front door and know that they need a certain service, but certainly there's so much here and it's free to them. And I hope that they leverage that as they pursue their goals. Thank you so much.
Stephanie, we did have a few questions pop up.
Okay.
Do you want to answer those now or after?
Great. Do you want to tell me those questions? Sure.
Yes. So our first question is, this is a great presentation. My student has issues with abstract thinking. Is there a way for the Learning Resource Center to work with her to ensure she's able to process and analyze?
Yes, well, we're going to hold that question because Becky is going to follow me, and she has, it's well timed and intentional that our two presentations go back to back, and she'll be able to answer specifically about what her resource center offers. And so the short answer is yes, and I think that Becky can kind of incorporate that and address that more in her presentation. And then I would say that in addition to those supports that are available through the Disability Resource Center, I think it's going to be, it is helpful for the student to take the extra time to also invest in setting up regular tutoring sessions for an individual tutor. A part of that work, depending on what their accommodations are, they might benefit from just having a dialogue with a master's student who's already taken that class and kind of can talk through the material with them. But there's specific accommodations, I assume, that can be provided depending on students' different needs. My own student is a student of the DRC and has some accommodations available. So in addition to that, he has to utilize the writing center so that his papers demonstrate what he really knows, and we're not with the barrier of some of his writing challenges. So.
And then our second question, I think I can answer, but Stephanie, you can jump in as well if you want. It is a presentation like this available to students so they know what could potentially happen?
Yes, and I'll let you answer that first.
At our orientation session, students go through a similar conversation with an actual faculty member here from the university about what the transition from high school or previous learning experiences might look like to college. And it covers many of the same things, including that sort of J curve with the valley of the delta and other things that Stephanie touched on. And then again, I'd like to say that this is recorded, and I certainly don't see why a student couldn't access that recording as well if they were interested.
Yeah, here's kind of that brilliant design of our orientation programming, is that we tried to set it up in a peer-to-peer kind of format. And with that faculty presentation, what I've observed is that you'll have maybe 2 or 3 faculty on a panel, and you'll have a current student leader like Cedric was, and they're each talking about different classes that they've taken and expectations. And the other big piece that I think is maybe even more important than what I'm talking about here with you that the student might connect with is when you hear differences from faculty to faculty and what they expect in their classes. I think that's also helpful, that the student has to understand that each faculty kind of has slightly different expectations, disposition, interests, and focus that they have. And so that also comes up in that the format that they do, where it's peer-to-peer of the faculty and the student versus parent to parent, but I'm also an administrator talking to you here. So I don't know if I'm as enjoyable for the incoming first year student as I might be in terms of connecting with the material for the support people, but yes, they are welcome to watch this session as well. Other questions? Is there anything else?
That is all I'm seeing in chat right now.
Well, thank you again for your investment in our institution by trusting us with your students. And I'll hand it over to Becky, and then I'll stick around just in case there's something else that pops up at the end, or if someone wants to direct message me. Appreciated the time with you. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Stephanie, for all that awesome information. I've seen that a bajillion of times, but every time I'm like, yeah, this is good stuff, kind of unpacking that hidden curriculum that you might not think about when your student comes here. And so just to kind of piggyback off of what she's already said, I am the director of the Disability Resource Center, and we are another one of those resources for your student, kind of on the back of that tandem bike at first. We're pedaling away. They're trying to encourage them to steer, but we're always here to support them until they can just independently ride that bike. So I am also located in the Michener Library on the garden level. It's actually under construction here right now, so you may hear some banging because summertime construction zone. So excuse the banging if you hear it, but feel free to snap a pic of this slide so you know where we're located. You have our phone number. That's a great way to just quickly get a hold of a staff member here anytime. Well, not anytime, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Slide. So disability includes so many different medical, health, psychological conditions that you may not think about. I think for some of you support folks out there, if your student had an IEP or a 504 plan in high school, then you're very aware of the process and the things that my office might offer to students. But what a lot of folks don't know is that the impairments and diagnoses that are reflected on this slide also would qualify a student for services on our program. So some of those things that you might not think about include like Crohn's disease, migraines, gastrointestinal disorders. If for some reason your student was experiencing a medical event like cancer or a surgery of some sort, we could also support them through those times as well. So while this may not be relevant to you at this moment, I want you to keep our office as a resource in the back of your brains. So if anything should happen to your student throughout their career at UNC, that you can keep us in mind as a support resource office for your students. So like I mentioned on the other slide, temporary injury is included in that. If we were in person, I'd ask for a show of hands to ask how many folks have students who like to ski or snowboard here in the great state of Colorado. There's lots of those winter activities. And so students go for spring break or winter break and come back with broken arms and legs and all kinds of other things. And so just know that, again, while you may not need our resources right now, in the future, if your student even requires some short-term assistance, then have them come to DRC to work with them on what they might need after recovering from a snowboarding accident. Hopefully that doesn't happen to any of your kids, but you never know. So the best way to get started with our office is to go to our website. Again, this is a great slide to snap a picture of if you have a moment and a camera phone. Our website is go.unco.edu/DRC. And there's a little button right on the homepage. It's circled on this slide in red, and it says getting started with the DRC. Your student can click that button, I think slide. It will bring them to a request for accommodations form. They just need to fill that form out. It asks for documentation, but they don't need to provide it at this stage. There are other opportunities to submit documentation to our office, but this will get the ball rolling. This goes to our direct email, and then it will prompt a staff member from our office to reach back out to your student with next steps. So this is great for students too who might be a little hesitant to get started with the process. They don't want to use the phone anymore and make phone calls. Just have them fill out the online form, and then someone will reach out to them. We do, however, require some documentation of disability for permanent long-term services. And that can include just information from a qualified licensed professional, students who have had IEPs and 504 plans during their K-12 experience. We will accept that as potential, qualifying documentation. It depends on the condition, but we may need additional pieces, but oftentimes we're able to accommodate, at least temporarily, with just a 504 and IEP. But the main thing is we want the documentation to reflect the student's current condition. So for those of you out there who may have a student with a learning disability and they were diagnosed in second grade, and that's the last kind of piece of documentation we have is from when they were 7 or 8. That's not really going to reflect how they're currently managing, because they've obviously made it through high school, so they've probably learned some strategies and maybe don't need all the supports that might be listed in that report from when they were 7. So that's while we don't have like a date limit, we do like it to kind of reflect what the current barriers are for your student in an educational setting, or if it's a housing or dining accommodation, like how that disability is impacting them from a current housing and dining perspective. There's multiple ways to get us the documentation. Like I said, the best way is to have your student fill out that form, and then a staff member will kind of guide them through the process of documentation submission and all of that. But you can submit it by fax, email, or even drop it off in the office. We have a portal they can upload it to if they'd like as well. So lots of different ways to get us that documentation once we kind of have that initial meeting with your student and figure out what's going on and what they need. We are open currently Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 for appointments. We are doing in-person video and phone appointments. One of the great things about COVID is that we've all become very comfortable in the Zoom environment, the virtual environment. And so we found that that's a real benefit for our students who are trying to get started with us on the program. So while we are in office, as you can see, I'm in my office right now, we're happy to meet with students in whatever way is the most comfortable for them. So please feel free to fill that form out. Or if you just need to call and get more information, our phone number is here on this slide. It's 970-351-2289. And you can schedule an appointment or just kind of run some questions by us as well. And I'll stick around if anyone has any questions after my little brief presentation. I will say that in response to, I think Cedric, I think that's it for me, but I will say in response to the question about the student with abstract thinking, referrals to the Writing Center and tutoring would be one of the main things that we would do to support your students. So Stephanie was right on target there. We also do have academic accommodations that may be helpful to your student. I think it just kind of depends. We do have to have kind of that one-on-one interactive process with your student to figure out what it is exactly that they're hoping for support with, and then we can kind of go from there. We also do organization time management meetings. So for students that just need to conceptualize some of that the hidden curriculum stuff, like Stephanie was showing on their the difference between a high school versus a college schedule and sometimes that is just really overwhelming for students, and so we can go through students and help them kind of just plan out their semester, and we do offer some workshops with different themed topics twice a month. We're starting this new workshop series, and so we would encourage your student to kind of join in on some of those. They can meet some peers and get some additional academic support help that way. So that is it for me. And like I said, I will just stick around and see if anyone has any questions. Thanks so much. Welcome to UNC.
I'm seeing one question in chat already. So it says, if my student has one of the other challenges from the list you showed at the beginning, do you need that kind of documentation?
I couldn't unmute myself for a second. So that's a great question. It really just depends on the type of diagnosis that your student has. For something more physical, a letter with a diagnosis from your family provider, your medical doctor would be fine. We don't need like a full psychoeducational report or an IEP or 504. So let me back up. The IEP and 504 are great if you have them. They are not required to come here and get services, if that clarifies that question at all. But the type of documentation that we would collect would really depend on what the student's diagnosis is.
And then there was a comment saying that they've met with your staff and they've submitted the paperwork. You all are incredible. So
thanks.
All right. Do we have any other questions that are coming to mind right now? Looks like we did have a question in chat. Is there a medical center on campus for emergencies?
So we do have a student health center, but that is more like a doctor's office. So that would not be like emergency type services. In a true emergency, campus PD would be called, and then the emergency would be triaged appropriately from there. If it's a mental health emergency, the counseling center has a 24-hour hotline that students can call. And then as well, like if it were a true emergency, like student was unresponsive or something like that, we would call campus PD. But there are no emergency medical services available on campus, if that is a better answer.
All right, so I'm not seeing any more questions in chat. So I think I'm going to formally end us here, and thank you all so much for coming. And thank you to Stephanie and Becky for taking time out of your schedules to come and meet with us. We can stick around a few minutes if there are any last minute questions or if anyone wanted to have a quick one-on-one conversation. But with that, again, thank you all so much for coming, and we hope to see you for our other parent orientation sessions.